Good morning, everyone. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the final live broadcast for the semester for AUE2602 on exam preparations. With me today is Ms. Genevieve Richard. She's returned from her AQUIP leave, so she's going to field your questions. So just to remember that during the broadcast, you can type any questions that you have, and she will answer them. And if there's something that's recurring a lot, she will just get my attention, and then we will address it during the broadcast. All right, let's begin. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, 2 weeks from today, it's exam time. A reminder that your exam is for 2 hours, 80% towards your final mark, it counts 80%, and your assignment marks count 20% towards your final mark. Okay, so not a lot of time left, just a reminder. Today's agenda is more about your exam techniques, but before we get there, we are going to cover the common pitfalls that we've identified students step into during examinations, things that we think you normally struggle with, specifically pertaining to King 4, as well as other statutory matters, and internal controls. So let's begin. The King 4 report, all of you should be aware by now that you are supposed to use the King 4 report, not anything else. During the marking of the assignments, we saw that there were a couple of students that still referred to King 3. So please just be aware, make sure that you study from the correct 2018 study guide and that you use the King 4 report. Next, I want you to be very aware of what is being asked when you answer a King 4 or statutory question. We noticed that a lot of students sort of don't read what is being asked and then they go off on a tangent. For instance, during assignment 2, you were asked to address King 4 related compliance and non-compliance. We, however, found a lot of students were addressing Companies Act. However, you may be writing the correct points, it's not in the memo because it was not asked, and you're wasting time. So just be aware of that. Then, I want to remind you of what we discussed earlier in some of the other live broadcasts, that when you do any King question or statutory question, you have to apply the theory. So remember that first you have the theory, so whatever the principle in King 4 states, then you have to apply it to the scenario, and then you have to conclude, for instance, whether they are complying or not. Remember that you don't need to write down the specific principle when you write down King Code. So you don't have to say it's principle 7.1, you just have to write the theory. All right, so just keep that in mind. If in the exam for any King or other statutory related question, you only give us the theory, you won't receive full marks. You have to apply it to the scenario. And just some random fact, this man, some of you may know who he is, some of you may not. This is Mr. Mervyn King himself. He was the starter of the King report way back in the 90s, and that is why it's called the King report. It has nothing to do, his surname is King, so it has nothing to do with any princes or whatever royalty. All right, just a random fact. Then I wanted to remind you about the directors. So this is where the other statutory requirements in terms of the Companies Act come in. You might also be reading the newspapers. There's a lot of questions being asked in the news about directors and the role they play in corporate governance specifically. Remind you about the specific sections in the Companies Act that you need to be aware of. It's section 76 in the Standards of Directors' Conduct. How should they be acting? What is expected of them? Liability, section 77, liability of directors and prescribed officers. So when can they be held liable? So if things go wrong, when can we as shareholders then go and say, well, you weren't doing what you were supposed to do? And then when are they indemnified? Section 78, indemnification. So when can we then not say that it is their fault? All right, so just be aware of those specific acts. That pretty much covers the statutory part of today's preparations. Then internal controls. So a lot of you kind of struggle with what is an internal control. So just to get back to the pure theory, in ISA 315, I believe, this is the theoretical answer to what is internal control. So firstly, it is a process designed, implemented, and maintained. All right? This process, who is going to design it, implement it, and maintain it? Those charged with governance, which is, for instance, your board of directors, management, and any other personnel in the company. Because everybody is supposed to implement these controls, and then the management's supposed to go and see, well, is it being implemented? So just some examples of that. And why do they do it? They do it to provide reasonable assurance about the achievement of the entity's objectives. So what are these objectives that we want reasonable assurance of? So we want to know how are they doing in terms of their financial reporting. Is it reliable? Can we trust what is being said in the financial statements? Are their operations effective and efficient? So again, if we think like, how are they, are they spending too much or too little? Are they spending their money effectively? And then compliance with applicable laws and regulations. All right, so again, with Companies Act, they need to comply. With King 4, if they're a listed company, they need to comply. So just a quick refresher. It is a process designed, implemented, and maintained by those charged with governance, management, and other personnel to provide reasonable assurance about their objectives. Their objectives include the reliability of the financial reporting, effectiveness and efficiency of its operations, and the compliance with applicable laws and regulations. Just to make sure that you are comfortable with this, I want to go into a quick example. That's just your reference. Quick example. For instance, if we take this internal control, this is an internal control. Just going to read it for you. Before processing an order, checks should be carried out by the credit controller or department to establish whether a customer's credit status is satisfactory. Now, you might remember that we said when you're doing any type of internal control or business cycle question, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, in which cycle am I? So in this case, we can then go and see we are in the revenue cycle. Why? Because we have a customer who's placed an order which would then lead to revenue, and we want to see whether this customer will be able to pay us. The function inside this cycle is credit management. That is the function that we are looking at. So if we just go and ask these questions, what, who, and why, in terms of the internal control, then we can have a look and see that what is being done. Checks are being done on the customer's credit status. That is what's happening. Then we say, who does it? This is done by the credit controller or department. And why? Because we don't want to sell goods to a customer who may already be exceeding their credit limit. It just does not make business sense. So if we go back and we say, we look at the definition of internal control and the entity's objectives, we don't want to lose money, so it's our financial statements, our operating effectiveness as a company, and then also even you can bring in things like the Consumer Protection Act. We're not supposed to sell things to customers who are not credit worthy. Okay, so that is just a quick refresh on internal controls. Intro, actually. I wanted to then remind you about the components of internal control. So this is where a lot of students kind of tend to struggle. So we're just stepping back a bit. So firstly, we defined internal control. Now we're saying internal control is made up of the following 5 components. Firstly, we have the control environment. Then we have the risk assessment process, the information system, the control activities, and the monitoring of controls. I just kind of gave you a quick example or explanation of what each of these are. So if we think of the control environment, this is for the entity as a whole. It's the tone at the top kind of, and it's whether the entity is doing things the right way, all right? Then we have the risk assessment process. This is important because remember, we are going to design, implement, and maintain controls to address risks. So firstly, we need to know what the risks in our business are. Then we have the information system, where we know that an accounting system produces financial information, and we want to make sure that that information is valid, accurate, and complete. Okay? Fourth one is control activities. These are actions. Activities are actions, and it's carried out for management to reduce the risks that we already identified as component number 2, to achieve the objectives. We've already discussed the objectives. And then finally, number 5, monitoring of controls. This is where we go and assess, well, these internal controls that we have implemented, are they actually being done? So we've designed them. Are they being done? And is it effective? All right, so we have to look at the control performance over time. Those are the components of internal control. Then I want to specifically zoom in on control activities. So remember, these are the actions being done by management or personnel in order to reduce risks and achieve the entity's objective. We have different types of control activities. So the first one is approval or authorization. Then we have segregation or division of duties, isolation of responsibility, access or custody, which is related to security, comparison and reconciliation, and performance reviews. On this one, so these are the things that we say, if these types of activities are being done, then we will be able to reduce risk. And I just wanted to remind you about the difference between segregation or division of duties and isolation of responsibility. If we think about segregation or division of duties, this is normally between people doing different things in a division, or even between different divisions. So if we think about a credit controller or a credit clerk that then sets a credit limit, this credit limit will need to be approved by a senior personnel member. This is division of duties. The person that decides what the limit is cannot be the same as the person who approves it, who has the authority. Then isolation of responsibility is when we all do the same thing. Okay, so we are all credit clerks and we're all setting different clients' limits. Now we want to know whether it was person X, person Y, or person Z that performed this specific duty. That is the isolation of responsibility. So hopefully that clears that up for you. Then I want to just remind you that internal controls are not foolproof. There are many limitations to internal controls, so just have a look at that when you're studying. The nature of control activities. So remember, we started by saying that there are types of control activities, then we have the nature of control activities. This is whether they are preventative, detective, or corrective. So this is actually whether that type of activity that we're doing, are we going to prevent the risk from happening in the first place? Are we going to detect it something when it's happened? Or are we going to be able to correct something? Okay, so just the difference between the type of control activity and the nature of a control activity. This is also very clearly stated in Jackson and Stent. So I just want you to go and read in Jackson and Stent, page 517, description C, where they have a section there where they clearly state also the difference between a general and an application control. This is also where a lot of students need to study, where they struggle. So information system control activities falls under your normal control activities. And these are then split into, when we're now talking about a computerized system, between general and application control activities. And I just want you to know the difference between the two. This is where the general controls are just what the word says. It's general. It establishes an overall framework of control. So if we think of you needing to log into your computer as a whole, that might be considered general. Everybody in a company will have a Windows logon, all right? But that does not necessarily give them access to anything specific. They just have their computer and they're able to log onto the network of the company. This is in contrast to an application control. This is specific to a particular task or application, what the word says. So just think of your phone. You have different types of apps, and you have may have different passwords or login details for these different types of apps. So now you have general access to your phone, and then you have specific access to your applications. This is, for example, in a company where the payroll person will have access to the payroll software, whereas the inventory manager will have access to their inventory management software. Okay, and these are specific application controls, and these can be directly linked to your control activity components. So just because they're computerized doesn't mean they're any different. They're still going to assist you with authorization, with isolation of responsibility, or with segregation of duty. Okay, so just have a look at those. Then, just a refresher, we did discuss this earlier this semester. When you're doing a scenario and you're getting asked questions, you're normally going to be asked a weakness, a risk, or an internal control. So you need to be sure what the difference is. So a weakness is something that is not being done as expected. What internal controls are absent? What are they doing wrong? Then we have a risk. A risk is the consequence of a weakness. So if I don't need to log into the payroll software, which is a weakness, then I can go and make changes to pay rates, for instance, which is the risk, the consequences that I have, possible financial consequences, okay? And then an internal control is what should be implemented to mitigate the risk, to lower the risk, or to address the risk. Just want to give you an example again. Brief description of a function in an everyday credit sales transaction of a company called Big Clean. Once an order from an existing client is received, it is immediately recorded on an internal sales order by the order clerk and sent to the warehouse for picking and dispatch by the warehouse clerk. So reading this question might ask you to identify the weakness. The weakness is the order is not checked against the approved customer list by the order clerk before accepting the order. So we already in the scenario said this is an existing client. So if it is an existing client, it should be on our approved customer list. And the fact that the person is not checking that is a weakness, because we might be selling something to somebody who is not actually an existing client. The risk is if we do this, we might make sales to an unapproved customer, and this results in a customer not paying his account. And then our internal control would be the order clerk should confirm the customer is an approved customer by checking if the customer is on the approved customer list. So hopefully that clarifies the matter for you between the difference between a weakness, a risk, and an internal control. So that was just a quick recap of certain things that we identified that students struggle with, specifically during the marking of the over the last couple of weeks. Just before we end this broadcast, we wanted to give you some general exam tips and techniques. Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, be on time. Don't put pressure on yourself. You don't want to be hurried. You don't want to be rushed. Be at the venue on time. If you don't know where your venue is and you have time beforehand, drive to the venue. Make sure you know where you need to go, how you're getting there, and be on time. Just remove that pressure from yourself. Once you're now in the exam venue and you start, just read the question carefully. Read what is being asked. Make sure you get to the crux of the matter, all right? Relax and read it carefully. If you don't know something, just try and write at least something for each question. If you don't write anything down, there's nothing for us to mark. Please write neat and write in bullet format as far as possible. Remember, there are a lot of different people marking, and as a student, we are all asked to make it as easy as possible for the marker to be, to read through everything that you're writing down. Guys, you need to manage your time smartly. this is a difficult one, but we noticed specifically during assignment 2, a lot of students actually rewrote something that we put in as an example. So if we, for instance, in a table give you example 1 and we say no marks are going to be awarded for example 1, then people wrote it again. This actually can take a lot of time. So, and you're not receiving any marks for it, so there's no point to it. We already know what the example was, so you don't need to tell us. It's just there to guide you. So small things like that, just pay attention. And in the same sense, where's my, here we go. I lost it, there we go. Watch out for the presentation marks. These are easy marks, guys. You know, you don't want to miss out on it. They are there, I assure you. So just watch out for them. If we ask you to present the answer in a table format, give us a table format. And that's 1 or 2 marks right there. And they may make a big difference. Then, yeah, as we said, you're writing this month. In preparation, just make sure you do the assignments. I know that the solution has not yet been released. This is due to the fact that students are still allowed to submit assignments. As soon as that closes, we will release the solution. And then I urge you to please go and have a look. Work through your assignments again, see where you went wrong, why you went wrong. If you don't know, call us or send us an email, and we will gladly assist you. Do the extra questions that we provided you with. The best thing for any auditing student is to actually do questions, all right? So spend the time, do the questions. Do the activities in the study guide. Have a look at the exam scope, which has been loaded, and spend some extra time on the identified questions. And if you're short for time, remember to also have a look at our previous live broadcasts. The links are still available, and they will remain available. Best of luck for the exam going forward. Before we end this presentation, I just want to see, Genevieve, is there anything any questions that we need to address?
There's one lady that asked if we do activity 7 on page 67.
Okay.
But we can do that.
Yeah, so to that specific question related to activity 7, we'll get back to you and assist you with that on an email or on a phone call. All right, so just remember, the hard work puts you where the good luck can find you. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen.